Okay. This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Robert H. McPherson, Dennis, Massachusetts.
Okay. So, were you drafted into the military, or did you enlist when you?
I enlisted.
Why did you enlist?
I had just dropped out of college, and I knew I was about to be drafted, so I chose to enlist into the Air Force because I thought I might get a better education out of the Air Force than if I was drafted.
When you were joining, what were your initial feelings about joining?
I was very comfortable about joining because I knew, we were at war in Vietnam, and I knew one of my reasons for joining was I did want to get into the police or that type of unit and get that education because I did want to be a policeman.
What kind of training did you have to do after enlisting?
Well, first I went to boot camp, which is just a normal training that every enlisted person goes through. And then I, fortunately, got chosen to be a security policeman in the SAC, the Security Air Command. And I went through that training for 2 months and learned how to, use weapons and, what all security functions are behind, the Air Force and so forth.
What was your hardest experience in training?
In training, well, it depends on which training you're talking about. Before I went to Vietnam, that was the hardest training I ever went through in my life. That was 6 weeks in Texas in July with 110 degrees, and we had to do everything. We had to learn how to, fight the enemy. At that time, it was the Viet Cong, and the hardest part, actually initially, was when we did 200 yards crawling under barbed wire with a rifle, and I can remember that, in Texas they had a lot of snakes, and they had warned us about snakes, and fortunately I didn't run into one, but I guess the mentally part of that was very hard because they taught us, they drilled us about the enemy, and we had to, every time we had to run, from one place to another place, and every time our left foot hit the ground, we had to yell kill. So, they were trying to mentally get us conditioned to fight the enemy, and also, train us to use weapons such as rifles, handguns, and machine guns, and hand grenades.
On the day you were leaving, how was your emotions with your family and everyone?
It was tough. My brother, my oldest brother, drove me to the airport, and coincidentally, the plane was going on the runway and lost power, and I said, "Is this a sign or what?" But anyway, now they get the power back on, but no, you don't have to put that in there. I was kind of had mixed emotions. One, because I had friends already over there in Vietnam, and secondly, I had no idea what I was getting into, and there was like no preparation as to, what I'd be doing, or where I'd be, or what. I didn't know anything about the country, or, Vietnam, or, but I felt comfortable, because on the flying over to Vietnam, when we stopped in Chicago, and I found two Air Force recruitees sat with me on the plane, and they had just joined the Air Force, and they asked me, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Vietnam." They said, "Oh, well, I'm going to Washington." I said, "Well, you're better off than I am."
Describe the emotion you felt when you first arrived in Vietnam.
Scared.
You're scared?
Yes. You have no idea when you land into a country, and they immediately take you from one place, and they ship you. I hopped on another plane, and they said, "You're going to Pleiku," which is where I was stationed in Vietnam, and I had no idea what it was going to be like, so forth. So I was a little, scared, but anxious. I had mixed emotions. I was scared, but also I was kind of looking forward to just getting there and getting acclimated to the, situation.
What was your first day of service like?
In Vietnam?
In Vietnam.
In Vietnam, we went on patrol. I was in a Jeep, and my job was to, I was the rider in the front seat, and my job was to manage the M60 machine gun. And we came under attack that night. And where I was stationed was in the mountains, and it wasn't like a ground attack. It was like mortars and rockets, and bombs flying into to where we were, trying to wipe out our base. And they lasted about half hour to an hour, and I remember thinking, I said, "Can I go 365 days through this?" And I said, "I have to." So,
what was the happiest moment in the war for you?
Happiest moment? I did have one happy moment. A kid I grew up with, Fred Curtis, we met on May 14th, 1969, and we've been trying to get, he was in the Army, and he was a, he was a tanker. I mean, he drove, tanks around, and that was his job, and I was on security police, which was guarding the perimeter and guarding the base and everybody in it. And I finally caught up to him on May 14th, 1969. And that afternoon I spent with him was by far my happiest moment over there. Please don't ask me my saddest.
What was it like in the war?
It was mixed because at first you know, I thought about home. I thought about being away, you know, but you you become a family, you know, because you're all in the same boat, you know, fighting a war that you really don't understand what you're fighting for because at that time we were supposedly fighting against, you know, communism, and we didn't know who the enemy was and who wasn't the enemy and so forth. And it was very, I don't know, I sort of like you, your troop or your squad that you're in that you're with become your family, and you don't think so much about your family at home.
What was your darkest moment in the war?
Okay, I told you I met my friend Fred Curtis on the 14th. On February, 2 weeks later, February 28th, he was in a tank, army tank, and Vietnamese, VC, the enemy, opened his hatch and dropped a grenade in the hatch, and that was the end. And I had 90 days, this is very hard for me, I had 90 days to go before I could be sent back to the States. And I felt like I lost my only connection to home. In the next 90 days, I didn't sleep at all. I was on duty all day, but I was on duty at night, and then you're supposed to sleep during the day. I never slept. I just felt, well, I'm not going to go home because Fred's gone, so I'll probably be next.
Describe how it was first like when you got to Vietnam.
Like I said, you're going into a country that you know nothing about, and you're not even sure, the people that worked on the base were Vietnamese, they hired Vietnamese, and they, it's much like a war over in Iraq. You really don't know who the enemy is, because some days, we found out later on that on days when a lot of the Vietnamese who worked on the base, if they didn't show up for work, we knew that night we were going to get attacked. So you didn't really know if you're working with the enemy or you're not working with the enemy. So, and then we didn't really know, why are we here? Are we trying to protect this country being taken over by communism or what? And in the meantime, they kind of shut us off. What was going back in the United States where the protesting was being done, and I didn't know about that. And when the United States people, or the people in the United States, are protesting the war, up at Woodstock and so forth, you just, you feel like, what is this for? You just hope you make it through it.
Who had the greatest impact on you?
Two people. One was Jim Conley from Pennsylvania. He took me when I got there. He came over to my bunk and he kind of talked to me and he said, it's not going to be easy. And but you got everybody here, and they become your best friends in the troop, in your squad. They do become your best friends, and you kind of bond. I mean, really bond together. There was one other person, Lieutenant Brown, who I met one day, and we had a long discussion, and it was, you don't have days off. I mean, I used to work. I used to be on guard duty 7 days a week, and every once in a while they give you a day off. And I ran into this Lieutenant Brown, and and we got talking and so forth, socializing. So we said we'd keep in contact while we were there. Well, he lost his father while he was there, and he had to go home. And then I felt, this is before Fred died, and he came back, and it's pretty hard to go home and bury your father and then come back. I have a lot of admiration for what he did.
While you were overseas, did you have contact with your family at all?
No.
You didn't?
No. Not like they do now, where they have video, conferencing. You can call your home, or you can do a FaceTime. I had no contact with my family for a whole year, other than mail.
What were the meals and how you were treated? How you
The
were treated
meals
there?
Were powdered eggs, powdered milk, and rations. And I used to get a ration every time I went on duty to my bunker at night. And in the ration pack, was fruit, crackers, and 3 cigarettes. Okay. Now, I don't smoke, but it does get cold at night and damp. I used to take the cigarettes and light them to keep my hands warm when I was in my bunker. Strange thing. And then, some of the guys get wind of that, and they said, "Don't waste those cigarettes on keeping your hands warm. Give them to me." The guys that smoke. So, yeah, the food wasn't great. Although I did gain weight. I worked out when I didn't sleep well over there, so I went down. There was a gym you could work out in, so I worked out, and I actually gained a lot of muscle.
How can you compare your feelings to when you first enlisted to when you left the military?
No, you might repeat that again.
How can you compare your feelings to when you first enlisted to when you left?
They asked me when I left, just before I left, if I wanted to, re-enlist for another 4 years. And I said, not while we're at war in Vietnam, because I did not want to go back there. And being in security police, I would be back there within 140 days, guaranteed. So I didn't want to go back there. So I would have gone back there, but I didn't understand, why we were even there to begin with.
What is something you miss about being overseas, if anything?
The camaraderie, the bonding. That's about it.
What's camaraderie?
Between the guys that when you go out on post at night, and all your buddies are out there with you, and you're trying to fight a war, and like I said before, they become your family. So I miss that part.
If you could go back in time, would you still join?
Yes.
You would?
Yeah.
When you hear the word Vietnam, what comes to your mind immediately?
Where I was, Vietnam, Freddie Curtis, who my kid I grew up with that got killed. I had trouble with it. I've had many nightmares when I came back, and I went through I had PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's some things I don't miss, but most things I don't miss, you know.
How did you feel on your way home?
When the plane took off from Cameron Bay, I was elated. When I got back to the States and I got discharged and all that, and I got on the plane from Washington State and flew to Chicago. I remember walking through Chicago Airport to my next flight to Boston. Nobody came up to me and said thank you. That was the hardest thing I dealt with. And then when I got home, nobody knew I even got home. There was no write-up in the paper. Not that I expect that, but there was, today you see when people come home from Iraq, I mean, there's a big deal, and they're welcoming, and there's parades, and there's thank you, there's something in the paper. Nobody even knew I came home because they're protesting the war. And I got that feeling that because I was in uniform, says, "Oh, you go off in Vietnam."
Looking back, would you have done anything differently?
No. I can absolutely say not.
Why did you join the Air Force over the military?
Oh, you mean the Army?
Yeah, the Army.
Okay. I had heard that the Air Force had a better educational program. So my first 2.5 years I spent in Ohio, and I took courses at the University of Dayton in military, in law enforcement.
Did you make any new friends that you're still in contact with?
No, I did initially. We were in contact, but they have these reunions. I don't see them as much. I don't see them at all. But I have made a contact in the VA that was in Iraq, and he and I share experiences, and I feel more comfortable talking about Vietnam. I wouldn't even be here talking to you right now if I hadn't talked to him.
How often do you think about the war and what happened?
Quite often.
What do you think about it?
I usually, I feel very lucky that I came back, because 57,000 didn't come back. So in that way, I'm very, very fortunate, but I don't have, great memories of being, it's like a year that, so it was a long year. When you mark off your calendar each day, and then every night you're waiting for, is it my turn to get hit by a rocket or a mortar or what, But I feel very lucky. I'm very fortunate to be here talking to you two.
What were your did you have any regrets about joining? No?
No.
How did your family react when you came home?
They're very excited. I didn't tell them I was coming home.
You didn't?
No. I surprised them. I don't know. I had this thing in me. I always had this thing in me. Now, this is going to sound, I think I talked about this when I was talking about when Fred Curtis died. I never, at that time, I never thought I'd come home again. So I was too afraid to tell them I was coming home because I was afraid something might happen. So I never told them until I arrived at my mother's door.
How was her reaction?
She was excited.
Was your service a positive or negative experience for you?
Positive.
How did you end up on Cape Cod afterwards?
I grew up in Cape Cod. I grew up in Osterville.
Name the most positive things that happened for you
In the service
in the service.
or in Vietnam? Service?
Either.
I think it made me stronger. I think it made me, it taught me a lot of things to be, you know, independent, that, you know, when you go through, I don't know if, you know, more so in Vietnam, the military taught me, you know, being a security policeman taught me how to be, you know, organized and how to fire weapons and all this stuff, but it taught me to be a better person, and I appreciate life a lot more than I used to. You can't take life for granted.
What are some of the good and bad qualities you gained through serving wartime?
Bad qualities. I don't know. When I came back, I was kind of. I thought I escaped something. I thought I escaped, you know, and I thought I was invincible, you know, and even though I was having nightmares about Vietnam, but I wouldn't tell anybody about them. And you know, you get this sense of you're indestructible, you know. But I don't feel that way anymore. But I did when I was 22. I was young.
Thank you for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Other than, no, I mean, you know, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the VA. You know, I've been for counseling for VA for PTSD, and they opened me up because I would never talk about the war. And the VA, they most of them are well, my counselor anyway. He is a Iraqi veteran, and he knows. He and I talk, you know, for the last 3 years, every 2 weeks, and you know, he's very interested in the Vietnam War, although he was in the Iraqi War, and he did 2 tours. But I'm able to talk about it, whereas, you know, if I talk to my wife about it, or if I talk to my kids about it, I don't want to share, because it wasn't a great experience. So I don't want them to say, "Oh, gee, that's too bad, Dad," you know, to my kids. You know, I want them to say, I did my duty. You know, and I'm glad I did it. I'm just thankful I made it through.
Thank you.